and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. I need to remind you all to ensure your mobile phones and any other electronic devices are on silent or preferably turned off entirely. In the unlikely event that there is a fire alarm, the officers will direct you in which way to evacuate the building. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our officers. Please make sure you look at the handout provided on your chairs or on the information slides displayed as you walk in and during the breaks for further guidance about this meeting. To ensure the smooth running of this meeting, I ask that nobody calls out from the back of the room during proceedings. In accordance with our public speaking protocols, those who have registered to speak will be able to address the meeting for their allotted time. If there is any disruption of the proceedings and the work of the committee is not respected, it may be necessary to temporarily adjourn the meeting. Finally, can I welcome members of the public to the meeting? Those of you that are registered to speak, I will call you forward when it is your turn to make your contribution. Members of the committee may ask you for questions of clarification, so please remain at the microphone until after members' questions. The microphone is turned on by pressing the button at the base of the unit, and a timer will appear on the screen to remind you of your remaining time. Now, turning to the agenda, I'd like to appoint a vice chair for this meeting, so I'd like to nominate Councillor Small. If anybody would like to second Councillor Small. Excellent. That's take your pick of hands there. Excellent. So, Councillor Small, if you'd like to join me up at the top.
If I could just quickly interrupt, as is usual on a Tuesday, it's likely there might be a test of the fire bells about 10 o'clock today. So it should only ring for a few moments. So just to warn you. Thank you.
Thank you. So turning to our next item, apologies and deputies.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillors Aaron and Councillor Rutter. We have Deputy Member Councillor Pett here with us this morning. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. And disclosures of interests. Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of most of the items on the agenda due to being a member of the South Downs National Park Authority, but as there's no material conflict of interest regarding these items, I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer that enables me to speak and vote on these matters.
Councillor White.
I'd like to declare that agenda item 9 is in my ward, but I haven't had any discussions about that planning application.
Councillor Small.
I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of item number 9 on the agenda due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. However, as there is no material conflict of interest regarding this item, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on the matter.
I'd also like to make the same declaration in regards to my role as a Hampshire County Councillor. Excellent. So next on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. Are we happy to accept those? Excellent, agreed. And are we happy to accept the update sheet today? Excellent. So now we move on to our applications. So our first application is King's School.
Thank you, Chair. I think.
Yeah, so members, we've received a letter in relation to this particular application. It was brought to our attention before you decide that there's been a grant of £300,000 awarded by Winchester City Council in relation to this particular scheme that is before you today for determination. However, what I can tell you is that £300,000 comes from the Community Infrastructure Levy. That is to say, it's not from the council's capital funds. It's a levy, as we all know, SIL, as it's accordingly described, which the developers, when they produce net dwellings over a certain meterage, they have to pay this charge known as the Community Infrastructure Levy. That pool of money is then awarded on a grant basis. And I can tell you that in relation to this particular scheme, the Cabinet decided on Thursday, the 13th of March of 2025. Now, I've checked the minutes, and none of the members sitting today, Chair, were actually part of Cabinet. I can say it was Councillors Todd, Cutler, Becker, Lerney, Porter and Westwood who decided that particular grant. But the £300,000 was awarded coming from two particular CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy streams. The first being from the Health and Community Fund for £100,000, and the second coming from the District Strategic Fund of £200,000 for the anticipated year of 25-26, accordingly £300,000. With that in mind, what I can tell you in relation to Community Infrastructure Levy, and for members of the public and those who are watching on YouTube, the actual planning practice guidance sets out what the levy can be spent upon. And this is national governmental policy and guidance in relation to planning applications and policies. And it says, accordingly, spending the levy, what can CIL be spent on? The levy can be used to fund a wide range of infrastructure, including transport, flood defences, schools, hospitals, and other health and social care facilities. This is in accordance with Section 216 of the Planning Act of 2008, and also Regulation 59 of the Community Infrastructure Regulations. The definition allows the levy to be used to fund a very broad range of facilities, such as play areas, open spaces, parks and green spaces, cultural and sports facilities, healthcare facilities, academies and free schools, district heating schemes, police stations, and other community safety facilities. The flexibility gives local areas the opportunity to choose what infrastructure they need to deliver their relevant plan, in this instance, your newly adopted development plan, and charging authorities may not use the levy to fund affordable housing. This particular application doesn't meet that caveat, and in the very first instance, it does set out in relation to play areas. Therefore, there is no apparent conflict of interest. It's in accordance with government guidance, but it's merely presented to you today for the sake of transparency that we as authority have apportioned developer community infrastructure levy towards this project.
Over to you, Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to the update sheet where a further assessment against policy NE2 has been taken, and an assessment of alternative areas that have been looked at. So here we have a wider site location. The application site is approximately at the point of the cursor, as you can see. So it's on the western side of Winchester, just outside the settlement boundary. So here we have an aerial view. At the point of the cursor is the application site. As you can see, it's accessed off Sarum Road, which runs just to the north. King's School lies to the southeast, with some additional pitch areas and open space associated with the school to the east, and to the west and south are residential. To the north is the Royal Winchester Golf Club. Here we have a view of the existing settlement boundary. So King's School is located to the point of the cursor here. However, there are existing areas of the school, such as located at the point of the cursor here, and there is an existing grass pitch here, that are outside the settlement boundary, and therefore this would be considered as an extension of an existing use into the countryside. I also feel it's important to note that this site has been allocated within the Winchester play pitch strategy to meet some of the identified need for artificial turf pitches in Winchester. So here we have the proposed site plan. They would have parking areas to the north adjacent to Sarum Road. The pitch would be located on top of where the grass is now, and would be accessed off the existing access from Sarum Road. You can see there is a line of dwellings just to the west here, boundary to boundary. It's approximately 22 metres from this boundary here at the point of the cursor to the boundary of the application site, and from the proposed pitch to the neighbouring dwelling is approximately 27 metres. Here we have a closer up version of the proposed pitch. There are 6 lighting columns. You can see these little back squares, 1 on either of the longer sides and 2 on both the longer sides. We'd also have, it's a little bit hard to see, but there is a pink dotted line that goes along the east and western edges of the pitch, and these show the 3.5 metre acoustic fencing that is proposed to go in. This was increased from 3 metres that was initially proposed. In terms of the floodlights, these would be approximately 13 metres high. They would be downward facing into the pitch with approximate maximum lux, of about 200. As you can see with all the multicoloured lines, this pitch would allow for a number of different uses throughout the year. And the proposed car parking area at the top, you can just see to the side as well, the existing parking area would also allow for its reuse as play areas on the site. Now we have some proposed elevations. There is a storage container, which you can see on the far right hand side here. That's approximately 2.5 metres tall. The lighting column in the middle here would be a maximum of approximately 13 metres. And then we have 3 types of fencing identified. So you'd have 4.5 metre fencing around the edge, 1.2 metre fencing around the spectator areas, and then the acoustic fence, as I mentioned, on the east and western edges. And there is a cross section included just above to give you an idea of what the cross section would be. And then we move on to some photos. So photo number 1 on the left hand side, you can see from the key at the top, this was taken from Sarum Road looking at the existing access. Photo number 2 on the right hand side was taken from Sarum Road looking across the site towards Sarum View. And then from within the site, photo number 1, you can see on the key, was taken from within the site towards Sarum View, looking across the existing grass pitch. And photo number 2 on the right hand side, looking towards across the pitch towards the existing access. Then we have number 1 on the left hand side, you can see from the key, it's taken from the top of the existing car parking area and concrete pitch, looking towards the access. And number 2 on the right hand side is looking across the site towards Sarum View. The recommendation is to permit. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, thank you. And I should have mentioned that we did a site visit, most members did a site visit last Friday to this application. So now I'll move on to public speaking. So first up are the objectors. So we have Andrew Griffiths, Reuben Peckham, and I believe you have a presentation. Not good. Do you want us to put, because I think we've got the presentation, do you want us to put it up on screen? We can keep that one on if you're happy. Okay, so if we keep this picture then on while you're speaking, are you happy with that? Yeah, okay. Sorry, this is something that I'm afraid you'll have to keep as part of your 3 minutes, unfortunately. So whenever you're ready, press the button on the base of the microphone, and your time will only start when you start speaking.
Okay, good morning. My name is Reuben Peckham. I'm a chartered engineer and an acoustic consultant. I've worked in research, industry and consultancy relating to acoustics, noise and vibration for in excess of 30 years. I've been retained by residents living in the vicinity of the proposed development site to provide my own independent review of the potential noise impact of the proposals on the neighbouring residential community. I stress that although the residents object to the proposals, my work is fully independent, and I would like to think that I would have the same opinion irrespective of who I'm employed by. It's my opinion that noise impact of the proposals will result in a significant adverse noise impact at the nearest residential dwellings to the site. This is despite the increase in the height of the acoustic barrier proposed at the boundary and the limitation of operational hours proposed during the planning round by the applicants. The impact sound from balls, shouting from participants and spectators and the like between 8 AM and 9 PM Monday to Friday and between 9 and 6 at weekends will create a significant adverse noise impact at the nearest residential dwellings. The planning practice guidance defines a significant adverse noise impact as one which will cause a material change in behaviour and a reduction in quality of life due to the change in the acoustic character of the area. It's my opinion that the extent of the noise impact alone warrants refusal of planning consent. However, if the committee was minded to recommend deferral pending further information, a test could be staged at the site to replicate the sound that could be expected from the proposals. This would involve playing an audio recording of the activities from a similar activity at the same level as I'd expected from the facility at King's School. All parties, including committee members, could attend and listen to the sound, hearing exactly how the proposal will sound at the nearest dwellings in order to make their own judgment regarding its acceptability. Please give serious consideration to this suggestion as it represents the fairest and most pragmatic means of determining the full extent of the impact. Thank you for your attention. I'll now hand over to local resident Andrew Griffiths.
Hello, I live next.
If you could switch on the microphone.
Yeah, okay, I live next to the proposed development, and firstly, regarding local road infrastructure, the application does not provide traffic volume predictions or junction capacity assessments. Given existing congestion on Sarum Road and Kilham Lane, residents strongly reject the council's unsupported claim that overall traffic flows will remain acceptable. Furthermore, no traffic management or parking control plans have been submitted, meaning the committee is being asked to approve this application on guesswork. Following Mr. Peckham's comments and his suggestions for an on-site demonstration, I urge the committee to defer the decision today until this vital investigation is conducted. This development is a significant investment of public funds, and it would be disappointing if the expected benefits are not seen because the site becomes a statutory nuisance, restricting its intended use through legal challenge. Taking the time to ensure compliance now is the only reasonable course of action. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Now, if you remain there just for a moment, because members may have questions for you. Members, any questions for the objectors? No. Okay, if you return to your seats at the back, we will move on to the next speaker, which I believe is the supporter, James Adams. Morning. So if you press the button at the base of the microphone to turn it on, and then whenever you start speaking, we will start the timer. So make yourself comfortable and then.
As well as meeting the identified strategic need, the proposed 3G pitch project at Kings provides an excellent opportunity for the local Winchester community to benefit from an investment into high quality sports facilities that will leave a lasting legacy for generations to come. King's School already has a well-established community offer that is supported by a dedicated team of staff who ensure the effective management and maintenance of sports facilities and enable the development of strong community links. This makes King's this perfect location for the development of community sports facilities. I'd just like to add that the majority of the people accessing the site will actually come up the King's Road. It will be a very small proportion who go to that rear exit onto Sarum Road. The new 3G pitch is designed specifically for community benefit, enabling the growth and development of local clubs led by a local network of volunteers. Volunteering in the community is a powerful way to make the difference while driving your own personal growth. It boosts mental, physical well-being, combats isolation, and helps build new skills and experiences. It is expected the activity associated with this pitch will be supported by around 100 volunteers each week. The usage plan for the 3G pitch has been developed with key stakeholders to ensure local need is met and maximum benefit is achieved. This new facility will support the physical, social and mental well-being of young people. Approximately 95% of the usage will be from young people, from tots under 6 years old up to the age of 18. For at least 6 hours a week, the facility will enable dedicated use for girls football, working with partners such as Southampton FC and Winchester City Flyers. It's estimated this will provide sessions for 150 girls each week. Additionally, Littleton Junior FC will provide the opportunity for 420 young people each week to benefit from the new 3G facility. These clubs, it's anticipated, will provide over 16,000 visits from local boys and girls each season. On top of this, the facility will also deliver recreational sessions, holiday clubs, charitable work, etc., which will provide positive outcomes for the local area. Littleton Juniors have also committed to working in partnership with Saints FC and Oz Kings to develop a pan-disability offer, providing inclusive opportunities for all. The school, working with Winchester City Council, has identified a local need to support the Ukrainian community, who have highlighted football as one of the activities that helps bring young people together and integrate with existing groups. This has been built into the usage programme and is another example of a positive community outcome that will be achieved as a result of the new facility. For the school, it will increase our playable surfaces for training, for matches and for pupils to be active during their lunchtimes as well as in their lessons. It will provide a year-round surface upon which to improve their physical and mental health, which will be a particular benefit in winter when the pitches access can be limited. Increasing the range of facilities available will mean that young people in the community, alongside the pupils at King's, will enter adulthood with improved health and an improved relationship with exercise and fitness.
Excellent. Thank you for sticking within your 3 minutes. Any questions? Excellent. Councillor Laming and then Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. How many weather pitches have you got at the moment at King's?
We have one AstroTurf, and then we also have some tarmac surfaces as well for tennis and activities like netball.
Okay.
Councillor White.
So it's about the transport and travel arrangements. Obviously, there's going to be extra parking, and more car trips. And our policies are really moving towards minimising cars and encouraging active transport. So obviously, you have the travel assessment states that there are links to pedestrian access, existing footpaths and cycle paths. But I'm just wondering how you are going to encourage people to use active travel more than just relying on what's already there. For example, are you providing any parking for cycles or anything that might just discourage car use? And the other question is the time of day that you're expecting the extra car trips. Is that going to be largely in the evenings and things like that?
Yeah, so the majority of the off-site users, i.e. non-King's pupils, will be in the evenings. So there would be additional traffic around that. I wouldn't anticipate additional traffic before school or during the school day, so it'll be a smaller window. We spent a lot of time looking at the parking. I'm very mindful. I'm a geography teacher myself, so the environment's very dear to my own heart. Looking at the impact on traffic in the local area. We did explore the use of the park and ride scheme, but we were concerned about young people potentially walking to the site late in the evening, particularly in the winter where it may be dark. We did hold a survey of traffic use on the site and look at the existing usage plan, which is why we've proposed some additional parking spaces. But we're very mindful to keep that to the absolute minimum because we're conscious of the impact of on the environment of building and on drainage, etc., whilst also trying to encourage other usage onto the site. So yes, we are actively promoting that in terms of a school, in terms of walking, cycling, buses, park and ride, etc. And so we are currently exploring putting additional cycle storage in for school use, but alongside for the activities in the evening as well. And we would actively promote the use of public transport, walking. Part of the work that was done was looking at different distances and radius around the site and what could reasonably be expected in terms of people walking to the site. So we'd actively promote that with the clubs that would use this area. And I think that they are promoting healthy, active lifestyles, so I'm sure they would support the members of their clubs in using that as a way to get to the school.
Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Adams, I speak as a parent of a school-aged child, and I would suggest that parents are not always as cooperative as teachers would like them to be in terms of what they're told to do, particularly with their cars. I also speak from experience of Sarum Road traffic. My question is, what can you practically do to prevent people using this pitch, if it goes forward, driving and dropping their kids in Sarum Road and increasing that traffic load?
So when we looked at the usage plan and it was recommended we might need some additional parking spaces, I think there were 2 points during the week when we've got full use of the existing facilities and then potentially the additional use here. So we are confident that the site won't be used at full capacity for the parking at all times during the evenings. The second thing is very conscious of trying to limit the traffic on Sarum Road, and so very keen that that area of parking is used primarily for disabled access or for members of the community who are coaching and volunteering those teams where they might have to carry balls and additional equipment to and from. So we can certainly control access. We control access at the front of the school through electronic gates, and so we could certainly do that at the rear as well to try and maintain or minimise the traffic on Sarum Road and allowing those users that really need it most to be able to use that part of the parking.
I had a question, if you don't mind. Will there be staff on site during the evening periods?
Yes, so our community centre is run by our community staff, and this facility, if approved, would be part of those facilities. We have at least 2 members of staff on the site at all times, and so they would be managing it and liaising with any clubs that were using it. And then we may need additional staffing with this new facility on top of that. So yes, we'd actively manage this facility.
And would there sort of be a phone number or hotline for residents to call should there be quite noisy sort of games of football in the evening?
Yeah, I think one of the recommendations was no whistles after 6 o'clock. And I coach my son's football club in Ringwood, and it's surprising the difference that makes actually in minimising the noise. And so, yeah, of course, we'd better take calls from local residents if they were concerned around noise, and that would be through into the community staff, and then the community staff could liaise with the coaches.
Any further questions? Councillor Laming.
I am concerned about the traffic on Sarum Road, and I notice on quite a few occasions where there's a lot of parents stopping to pick their children up along there. With the increased access that you're making along that area, I would expect a lot more traffic. So what are you going to do to minimise the amount of parents picking their children up?
Yeah, we actively encourage all parents to come round to the front of the site, so up through the King's Road. We promote our travel to school programme, which includes using the park and ride and the buses and cycling, as you would imagine. We had a visit recently from the traffic enforcement team at the front of school to try and make sure that taxis weren't parking in and around the roundabout area at the front of school. And I did talk to them about whether they could support us at the rear of the school, and they seemed very open to doing that. So I think it will be through messaging with the community, but also working with local enforcement officers, but also working with the clubs themselves, because outside of the school hours, so from sort of 4 o'clock onwards into the evening, it will be the clubs, or probably 5 o'clock, it will be the clubs that are using that facility. And we need to be very clear from the off what the expectations are around how and when they access the site.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer total access from the front of the site, to be perfectly honest. Thank you.
And I think just to follow up on Councillor Laming's question, so there would be so there's sort of existing parking at the front of the site would be available to those using the pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as with any community user in the evening, that part of the site is open for users to park there. As I said, there are a couple of pinch points during the week when all facilities are in use, and this would be on top of that, which is why the additional parking was put at the back. So It would be for limited periods during the week, but as I said, it may be needed for disabled access and or coaches who are moving materials around.
I think that's all of the questions. Thank you very much. If you could turn off the microphone and return to your seat. So we now go back to Rose. Do you have any update or follow up following public participation?
No, Chair, thank you.
Excellent. We'll go to questions on the whole report then in that case. So Councillor White.
Yes, it's regarding the section about sustainability in your report. Obviously, it mentions about the construction and the operation, the locally sourced aggregates, but what about the infill material? So is it going to be the recycled tyres, the crumb that is largely used for these kind of pitches? And if so, were they required to investigate any other more environmentally friendly infills? And if it is the tyre one, what containment measures would they have to put in the design to make sure that the crumb doesn't get into the environment?
Thank you, Chair. This may sound a bit of a cop-out, but unfortunately I'm not the case officer, so that's very limited input that I can give you. All I can really say is that the construction would accord with our national guidance. So that's what they would be following in terms of construction.
And just perhaps you don't know, but it says it complies with policy CN3 regarding energy efficiency, regarding carbon. But what about CN8 for the embodied carbon across the life of the pitch? Obviously, it will need to be replenished and repaired across its lifespan.
Again, I'm not sure I can answer that question. I'm really sorry, Councillor. But
presumably because it's not mentioned in the report, it complies, but it's not in there. And I looked in the portal and I couldn't find any sort of documents to back that up, that embodied carbon had been looked at. So yeah, unfortunately I don't know. I would assume that there is some sort of maintenance plan in place that the school will be managing and monitoring to make sure that there are things in place. Bear with me while I just double check the conditions to see if there's anything in there. I think there's conditions regarding the design, and presumably that would have to comply with the containment of the crumb, because
yes,
you'd have to make sure. So perhaps that's covered in that condition. But
I would say so. Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Councillor Langford-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be sure that the loss of the grassed area is compensated in terms of biodiversity loss by the planting scheme that is conditioned.
Thank you, Chair. There is a section in the report regarding biodiversity net gain. So they will be securing off-site biodiversity net gain in the form of credits, and this has been conditioned. So yes, there is a planting scheme and there will be some benefit on the site. However, the majority of the biodiversity net gain will be secured off-site.
Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points that we raised during the visit there. On the chain link fencing that's around, can we make sure that that's a low level noise version? Because I remember we had some problems up on one of the muckers that we put in our ward. So I'd like that to be in to ensure that the noise is kept down to the lowest level. And also we need to think about the light pollution going back onto the residences that are near there. It will ensure that the light spill won't go back into their gardens from those quite tall light positions.
Chair. So in regard to the chain link fencing, my understanding is that it will be in panels, so the grids will be secure, so that it wouldn't necessarily have any sort of give and take to make it any more noisy than it would need to be. It would be kept to a minimum. In regard to light pollution, the lighting would be directed downwards, and that's twofold. One, to protect the residents, so it's limited in its impact, and it just lights the area that is absolutely required. And it would also serve for the ecological benefits as well. So it's limiting the amount of light spill. So it's just lighting the area that is required and not anywhere else.
Thank you. And the other question that came up at the site visit was the distance to the properties on that side of the site.
Thank you, Chair. So I did a measurement this morning, and from boundary to boundary, it's approximately 22 metres from the application site to the boundary of the nearest property. From the edge of the proposed pitch to the house, it's approximately 27 metres.
Is that both properties?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 points here, if I may. Can I go back to Mr. Lucas's points earlier and just ask a bit of clarification there? The SIL application, was that for a 3G pitch or this particular 3G pitch? In other words, was the SIL grant given in advance of a planning consent?
So I'll have to go back to the minute, council. I've crossed the tab off now, but it just mentioned a 3G pitch. I don't have the details of what that particular application looked like. Just minuted a 3G pitch with the ancillaries, if you were, storage and so on.
Okay, I'd just be very surprised if a SIL grant was granted for this particular pitch in advance of a planning consent.
I couldn't say if it was this particular pitch.
Okay.
It might be just the principle of. Yeah.
Fair enough. Secondly, Mr. Griffiths, I think it was, mentioned the acoustic. Talking of acoustics. Right, try again. I think it was Ms. Griffiths who mentioned the acoustic character of the area, which I suppose inevitably carries a degree of subjectivity. But I noticed in the report, a noise impact assessment was submitted with the application, which has been amended, blah, 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 blah. It says it concluded that the development would potentially be noticeable but not intrusive and would result in no observed adverse effect. That doesn't seem to tally with what Mr. Peckham said on the acoustics. I wonder if I could ask you what the balance is from your perspective on that.
Thank you, Chair. So when it comes to the noise, we have had our environmental health officer review the noise report, both the original and the amended version. The original noise report did suggest a later usage and suggested that it would not have a detrimental impact at the higher level. Our environmental health officer reviewed this and they did not agree. I understand that, you know, it's professional standard. You can have a disagreement between professionals. Therefore, we have reviewed this and we've suggested a shorter operational time, which is in the report under the noise section. So it's Monday to Friday, 8 AM till 9 PM, Friday and Saturday and Sunday, sorry, from 9 AM till 6 PM, and no whistles at all after 6 PM. So in terms of the officer report, we did review this and we looked at it as a balance between the need for the artificial pitch and the need that Winchester area has. It still needs to be used. We have a lot of clubs that want to use it, while looking at what the neighbour amenity is, and we've concluded that 9 o'clock finishing time would be an acceptable time to allow all the users who want to use it that time, as well as not impacting neighbours.
Okay, thank you. And the final one, I was just going to ask you to go back, if you can, to the plan of the pitch you had, because I just want to be absolutely clear where the lighting masts are going to be. Sorry to be a pain, but could you just pick them out for me with the cursor on each side?
Yes, of course. So there's one black box here, which is one lighting column. So at the point of the cursor here, and opposite it at the bottom, there's one here. And then on the western side, there's one here and one here at the bottom. Then on the eastern side, one here and one here at the bottom.
Councillor White.
Just going back to the transport and travel, so we've had sort of verbal commitments from the applicant regarding encouraging the active transport. But I just don't know if we need something a bit more. I mean, could we condition cycle parking for this particular pitch, or it was also mentioned about the entrance on Sarum Road just being for limited use and disabled access, but we've got nothing to sort of guarantee that. I don't know whether there's anything stronger we could condition around that.
Thank you, Chair. Essentially, in terms of the accessible or sustainable transport, the Highways Authority haven't asked for any additional cycle requirements or pedestrian requirements. And in terms of putting a condition in place that would require use of the King's Road access, I'm not entirely sure how that would meet the 6 tests for a planning condition. I'm not sure we could enforce it easily. So while I understand it, there may be ways that the school already uses that were mentioned by our commenters, and they actively ask users of the site to cycle and walk as much as they can. I believe there are existing facilities for cycle parking on the site, and they would be used primarily as well. However, when it comes from areas that are coming further afield, it's a little bit more difficult, but there, as the school, as existing, they always have public transport first and sustainable transport used as a preference, and they do communicate that through various channels to parents, users as well. So having an additional condition may be unjustified in this case, I think.
Councillor Lehman.
Having used Sarum Road and Kilham Lane for more years than I care to remember, the traffic there is diabolical, and it's a safety issue for the children if they're on bikes. I wouldn't let my daughter go up and down that road on a bike. I think we need to look very closely at how we stipulate that site is accessed, and I think that we really need to consider conditions on that.
What was the question? Sorry, Councillor Lehman.
I would like to see a condition that's strongly opposing parking along the back there unless it's for loading or disabled, and make sure that the site is accessed from the King's Road, the King's main entrance.
Thank you, Chair. While I understand the desire, I don't think we could justify it in terms of the 1, 2, 2 tests. So the Highways Authority have assessed the use of that access and they found it acceptable. The school have indicated that they would be using the main access of the King's Road as a priority. Therefore, from planning perspective, I don't think it's justifiable to include an additional condition to restrict the use of that parking area, unfortunately.
Any further questions on the report? No? Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm going to have another go at this because well, first of all, I'm just hurriedly trying to find the Hampshire Highways comment in the report, and at the moment failing dismally, but I wonder whether they have proactively assessed that and made a comment, because I have to say it's contrary to the lived experience of certainly Councillor Laming myself, and I suspect a lot of people in this room, that this will have no effect on the traffic levels in Sarum Road. And I also find it strange that we cannot condition this to prevent any access potentially from Sarum Road, because disabled access could actually come through the school site as well. There is a clear problem in Sarum Road of which most people are well aware, and we just seem to be adding to it for want of a positive comment from Hampshire Highways that this is acceptable to them.
I think it appears as though Hampshire Highways has had no objection subject to conditions 13 and 15. So 15 is regarding the construction management plan, and condition 13 is regarding no development shall be brought into use until the parking turning areas have been provided within the site with accordance with the approved plans.
I agree, Chair, but that doesn't tell us that anybody from the Highways Department has actually gone up there and taken a positive view of this. All it is a negative comment. Now, I know exactly what Mr. Lucas is going to say, that in the absence of Highways saying no, what I'm, I suppose, making the point is that our lived experience doesn't agree with that.
I think, Councillor Pett, you can preempt what I'm going to say here, and it's the usual rubric of what the High Court's helpfully illustrated towards how you approach issues and weight towards the views, if you like, of professional statutory consultees. Now, Hampshire Highways are charged with looking after the adopted highway. In this particular instance, they are a statutory consultee. Your planning officers, your professional planning officers consult Hampshire Highways on a daily basis, and Hampshire Highways are charged to, one, look at this particular issue along this particular routing, and two, provide their professional opinion. Their professional opinion has been given to you. What I can tell you, though, in the case of Shadwell Estates Limited versus Brecon District Council, the High Court considered this in relation to what weight you attribute to statutory consultees. In this particular case, it was to do with ecology, and I believe it was Natural England. I'm just scrolling down to make sure. Yeah, it's ecology and a point to do with the environment. The High Court says here, secondly, a decision maker, that is you, should give the views of statutory consultees in this context the, quote, appropriate nature conservation bodies, because this case concerns an ecology point, great or considerable weight. A departure from those views requires, quote, cogent and compelling reasons. See the case of Crown on the application of Park District Council against the Secretary of State for Communities Local Government 2008 in the admin court per Justice Sullivan, and also Crown on the application of Acaster versus the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs 2010 in the High Court Administrative Division per Justice Owen. See also Jones against Mansfield District Council 2003 in the Court of Appeal per His Lordship Lord Justice Dyson. So you have to give the views of your statutory consultees great or considerable weight. That's the first premise. And secondly, if you're going to depart from those views, you have to come up as a planning committee with cogent and compelling reasons. Now, at this particular point in time, I've heard the views of obviously Councillor Laming and Councillor Pett. I've heard the views of the professional planning officer, and we all know the test for for conditions, to put conditions on. They have to be reasonable, they have to be enforceable, they have to be related to the development. The concern here is obviously to do with the routing. Now, if you're looking at perhaps changing the routing or access in a certain way, that may, I do not know, because Hampshire have not said this, it may need a traffic regulation order to change routing. It would have been within the gift of Hampshire to say that, but they've not said that to you. It doesn't take much for a highways engineer to go out when they're consulted to look at an application and make their professional views known. In this instance, they have not. They do not object, subject to the conditions we already have. So if we are going to go against your statutory consultee's advice, we need cogent and compelling reasons. Otherwise, that condition can be appealed quite rightly by any developer in this applicant, King's School. Now, I can't do much more to advise you, but you're welcome to come up with cogent and compelling reasons, and we will need those.
Councillor Aming has his hand up for hopefully some cogent and compelling reasons.
Yes, this whole usage of Killam Lane and Sarum Road was brought up when we did the planning application for the new 55, I think it was, houses in Killam Lane. And I want to make sure that the traffic highways people have taken that into consideration when they've looked at the traffic flow for this. And I think that's quite a compelling reason for us to make sure that this has been taken into account.
Councillor, I think what that is
road are one single track roads, and that we're looking at the safety of the children as being paramount.
I think that's more an issue about Hampshire Highways practices, Hampshire County Council has, as to how they respond to planning applications and whether or not they're putting enough material before you. Whether or not that's an issue to do with this application before you today is perhaps a different point. Now, we can't do much more other than work with the evidence and the consultations we've given with here. To go beyond that, we're in the realms, as we quite rightly know, of anecdotal evidence. Now, Hampshire will not, for example, because they do not object, they will not support any reason in which to give this condition. And if the applicant here was to appeal it, Hampshire will not be present because they do not object. So it would be for us to spend for a transport consultant at ratepayers' costs to make the case, when it should perhaps arguably have been Hampshire. Now, Hampshire do not see any reason to object. So I can't do much more. We are where we are, and it's a matter for members. But if you need this condition and you want this condition, I think we need more than anecdotal evidence in this particular case, I'm afraid.
Any further questions on the report? We'll move to debate in that case. Any members for debate? Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, when we went up on the site on Friday, I drove back down Killam Lane. I don't think you can get much more cogent than that. You can barely get a car down in between the planting. But as Daniel Lucas informs us, we have to fight this at our own expense. So I don't think we can do that.
I think, Councillor, we've heard from one of the objectors, and I think it's a fair point, this issue of whether or not you want to defer. And I think the deferral was put principally on the point of noise. So, but it seems to me we haven't moved on to the amenity objections perhaps yet. We're still talking about traffic sustainability and matters to do with the highway. If we're in this territory of perhaps looking at deferral and putting in the equation also highways points, then I suggest strongly we don't debate the merits here and the point be put as to whether or not you wish to defer. And in that point, we could perhaps push Hampshire some more. But weighed against that, this matter has already been, I believe, deferred. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the applicant here is entitled to a fair crack at the whip. It's been deferred already, and you're putting the applicant's, obviously, business needs aside for another deferral. So again, weigh that in the balance here as to what's fair and reasonable.
Right. Thank you. The point I was going to make is that we can't actually not do it because there's no grounds from it as far as Hampshire Highways is concerned. But I think what we have to do is try to encourage by all means possible that people park on the school site itself. There's about 250 parking spaces there, and discourage as much as possible people using the Sarum Road exit. entrance. And I mean, you can see there's a case of balance here with the benefit for the community. I mean, I think the Winchester Council recognises that by the fact they've dished out some SIL money. And against that, you have to balance about the noise disruption that you're going to have for the adjacent housing. But I would say overall, I would be in favour of allowing this. I think the community benefits outweigh the problems.
The other offer here, councillors, and I think Rose quite rightly placed it before me, is whether or not it needs a parking management plan. I think it's 46, 47 spaces. And that seems sufficient in the planning officer's balance. That's more than enough. There are no parking standards, I believe, which apply to this type of development either. So again, if you're asking perhaps for a halfway house, a parking management plan, is it reasonable given that there is no parking standard to adjust this, to assess this against? And also it seems as if there's enough spaces. So even the halfway house of asking for a parking management plan is a little bit fraught, but that is perhaps an offer. Rose quite rightly placed it before us. We could do that, and I'm sure the applicant would be able to entertain a parking management plan and get that as a pre-commencement condition. Other than that, we're in deferral territory, perhaps.
Councillor White.
Yeah, so obviously this is an important sports facility that would provide, you know, long-term health and sports access. But yeah, I would appreciate a parking management plan and maybe to include some detail on how we could more encourage the active travel. But also, if we're going into deferral territory, there isn't very much detail about the sustainability of the materials, the embodied carbon. I can't see that anywhere. So perhaps the committee need more information on that to be able to see whether it complies with some of our sustainability policies. But it's whether we're allowed to defer it at this stage.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very much in the devil of the deep blue sea on this one. Over the years, we did a lot of research when we were doing the new leisure centre, and there is a significant shortfall in all-weather pitches in Winchester. And I have to balance that against the safety of people using that particular site. I think that if we go for a parking management plan, that may go some way to actually helping us understand what's going on and allow a pitch to go forward. Against that is the noise and light pollution of the residents there. But I am really at a loss of the way that Hampshire Highways reports to us and gives us their statutory opinion. I don't think they've taken anything into consideration on this site, and I think it's very poor, and we need to actually make that known to Hampshire County Council. And that, so I shall listen to what other people have to say, but I strongly recommend that we go down the planning, the parking management.
Would you like to propose that as a condition then, Councillor Lehman?
Yes, I would.
I think Councillor White expressed would be seconding. Okay. So this is so this then is the vote on the additional condition for a parking management plan, which would be a precondition. Yeah. Excellent. So all those in favour?
That condition will go on if members are minded on the obviously principle of the application itself. So yeah, we've made a note, and that will be a pre-commencement condition to the applicant, who I can see is chatting out the back. So it will be pre-commencement. Thank you.
Can we just also make sure that this committee sends a very strong note to Hampshire Highways?
We take that offline and talk to obviously the director here.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Councillor Langford-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate Councillor White's comments about the sustainable transport in terms of the parking, but a lot of the concerns on the comments from residents were concerns about parents stopping on Sarum Road to pick up and drop off children. And I feel that parking actually mitigates that issue by providing parking on site. The parents won't be stopping on Sarum Road. So I hear both sides, so I'm still listening to the debate.
Any further members for debate? If I could chip in that case, I do think I appreciate all the concerns that have been raised in both the questions and the debate. I mean, this is a proposal that is very much needed for the Winchester district. We know we are short on 3G pitches, and that's quite evident in the number of supporters that have commented on this application. But we do need to take into those considerations in regards to the impacts on neighbours. I do think that the 40+ parking, as Councillor Langford-Smith said, is going to mitigate. And if we were to sort of close off that entrance, there would be, you know, concerns in parking on nearby drives and nearby roads where we parked for our site visits. I do also think that in regards to the number of spaces that's been provided, you're not likely to have, even if each individual player drove in their own car separately, you're not likely to have more than 40 cars there for even a 11-a-side match. And I know obviously KISS training sessions will come with more traffic, but I think the provision for parking there is quite sufficient, especially as the supporter of the application mentioned that the front of the site of the school would be open up parking wise for residents there as well. But with the additional condition, obviously that can be ironed out so that we don't come to the situation where Sarum Road is become a bottleneck, as I'm sure it is during school pickup and drop-off times. In regards to the lighting, we sort of know, and we've had previous concerns in regards to previous applications around lighting. However, the directional lighting of more modern floodlights is much more targeted, so the spill from lighting there is sort of mitigated. In regards to noise, I do welcome the additional increase to the height of the acoustic panelling. Also, the direct line that any residents would have to staff on the site. Just from personal experience, I play football at Swanmore, where their 3G pitch is quite close to residential areas as well. And in the years that I've been playing there, we haven't had a complaint in regards to noise, and we play the 8 till 9 p.m. slot, so most impactful from that side of things. So I think with all those considerations taken in, I think that any issues have been mitigated from this, so I'll be supporting the application. Any further members for debate? No, we move to the decision in that case then. So this application is recommended to be permitted. Can I see all those in favour of permitting this application? Any abstentions? Against? No, so that application is approved. We will take a 10-minute break and before we move on to the next item. Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. The next item on our agenda is the Waterlooville application, which has been withdrawn. So we're going to move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is Dean Cottage in Swanmore. And Cameron Tyler is our officer. So over to you, Cameron.
Just jump in. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, the Waterlooville has been withdrawn from our agenda, not the application in its entirety. So just to clarify, that's on the item 8. So back to item 9.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is an outline permission with all matters reserved for a 4-bed self-built dwelling and garage within the rear garden of Dean Cottage in Swanmore. Here we have the location plan with the site marked by the red outline, and I'll just quickly highlight the location of the proposed site and dwelling. It is going to be in the southern section of the site itself. And just for reference to when it will be coming further forward in the presentation, these dwellings to the southeast of the site, this is number 16 Myers Close, and this is number 18 Myers Close. Next to the proposed site plan, the site is currently shown to be within the green section. I'll highlight that the blue section was noted to be for potential future development. The red is what is to be retained within the curtilage of existing Dean Cottage, and yellow is the access. With regards to the blue, that would require any further planning application, so that will be assessed on its own merits itself, so that doesn't have any weighting upon this application itself. And again, on the site plan, I'll just highlight this is the footprint, which is indicative. This plan is currently indicative, as all matters are reserved. This shows the footprint of the proposed dwelling situated there, and the garage along sort of the northwestern boundary. And again, I'll just highlight this is number 16 Myers Close, and this is the curtilage to number 18 Myers Close here. And I'll highlight some quick distances for reference for members from the nearest point of the indicative site footprint of the dwelling itself to number 16. It's around 14.5 meters. To number 18 Myers Close, it is around 22.5, and from the nearest point of development as shown on the district plan with the garage to Parkview, West Winds and Dean Cottage itself, it's approximately, they will fall approximately over 25 meters away from the location of the garage at the nearest point. Next we have an aerial photograph. Well, I've included 2, so the left-hand one is showing it from a wider context with both marked, the site being marked on both plans by the yellow triangle. And I'll just highlight within this one, this is the location of the garage, which is currently on site, which will be removed as part of the application. But again, this just gives you the context of the residential area. The right-hand plan is then just a bit closer up, again, marked by yellow triangle. And again, the garage is situated there along the southeastern boundary. Next, we have views looking southeast towards the proposed site. In the bottom left hand of the presentation, there's a site plan just showing roughly where the photos were taken, just to help members picture that. So the top left is from New Road itself. The top right is from within the site, within the hard standing and access, with the white doors there towards the rear being the garage. And the bottom photo is just again taken a bit closer towards the garage. And I'll highlight there's number 16 Myers Close, the left-hand side of the garage, and number 18 to the right-hand side. Next, we have some closer views towards the southeastern boundary. Again, we're just in front of the garage, and we can see number 16 within all 3 of the photos, and in the right-hand photo, number 18. Followed by a view from and towards the northeast. So the top left photo is looking towards the northeast, where this is Francis House. This is the land which will be retained within Dean Cottage, and the top right and bottom photo are looking towards the southeast from within sort of what would be retained as the curtilage of Dean Cottage itself. And in the bottom photo, which is more sort of the residential amenity area for Dean Cottage, you can get a slight view towards the garage door just through the shrubbery where the mouse currently is. Next, we have some additional photos with the top left looking towards the southwestern boundary and the top right looking towards the northwest. Again, we can see Dean Cottage there, just the right-hand side of the photo, and the properties of West Winds and Parkview on the left-hand side, with the bottom photo being more directed towards those of the neighbouring properties of of West Winds and Parkview itself. This concludes my presentation, with my recommendation being to approve the application. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you for that. We now move on to public speaking. So we have 3 public speakers. We have the objector, who is first up, Christopher Jenkins. Well, good morning. So when you're ready, you've already done it. So yes, your 3 minutes will start when you start speaking.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My family and I moved to a neighbouring property in March 2026 after the public comment period had already closed, so respectfully ask that my objections are taken into consideration. I support the concerns already raised by neighbouring residents, some here today, and the parish council, and would like to highlight several key points. The issues with planning applications, as highlighted by Winchester City Council, relevant here are: 1, case law and previous decisions. This application closely parallels with previous Whitesbury planning application 12-00319 out, which was referenced in a number of public objections. I urge you to read that report, as the objections are exactly the same as those raised here. The application was refused, and approving this proposal would be inconsistent with that earlier decision. I use the term parallel because they are literally a few gardens apart. Whereas in fact, the refused proposal was a single-storey 3-bedroom house, whereas Dean Cottages is a 4-bedroom and a garage. To approve would set a precedent for future back garden dwellings, which is a detriment to the local area and fundamentally changes the character of this part of the village, which highlights point 2 on the list, conservation matters, and point 3, the effect on the enjoyment of neighbouring properties. The impact on neighbouring amenity would be significant and unavoidable. Our property shares a 12-metre boundary with the proposed dwelling. The positioning and scale of the house would create direct overlooking into our living room, our bedroom, and most concerningly, our 2-year-old son's bedroom. Privacy is not a minor issue for families living in close proximity. It is fundamental to the enjoyment and security of our homes. Importantly, this proposal does not affect only 1 or 2 adjacent properties, but 7 neighbouring households and families would experience a direct impact on the daily quality of life. The previously refused neighbouring application referenced 5 or 6 families impacted. This one has 7. I would also note that examples cited in support of this application are not directly comparable. Those developments do not overlook neighbouring properties and do not create the same level of intrusion into private family living spaces. Finally, there are 9 public objections to the proposal, including an objection from the parish council itself. These are the voices of the residents who know and live in this community every day and who bear the consequences of this decision long after today's meeting concludes. A number of us neighbours take objection to being dismissed as not having sufficient weight to make objection. This is the opinion of the planning officer and is an opinion only. To agree with them would be inconsistent with the Whitesbury case officer, previous council members and Winchester's own criteria for planning application issues. My family chose this village and this part of the village because of the previous decisions to reject similar planning applications. There have been drainage and flooding issues highlighted in the objections, and case law Particus Stevens versus Seahan refers to this exact situation. So Dean Cottage will be liable for damages should this development go ahead. I sincerely hope to avoid any future legal disputes between neighbours in order to preserve the strong and positive community that already exists. So I would like to leave the committee with 2 questions. 1, how could approval of this application be justified when application 12-00319 out was rejected under such similar circumstances? And 2, if the residents most directly and significantly affected alongside the parish council are all objecting, on what basis can those concerns reasonably be set aside and ignored? Thank you for your time and consideration.
Very good on timing.
Route through that.
Excellent. If you just wait there just for a moment, do any of the members have any questions for our objector? Councillor Pett.
Just the quickest of questions, because you were delivering that admirably rapidly. Which was your property again?
Mine is Francis House.
Okay.
The proposed development stands slightly higher than the Myers Close and Francis House properties, so they would be able to overlook into each of those properties.
Excellent. Any further questions? No. Excellent. If you return to your seat, Councillor Peck, your microphone is on. Sorry. So we now move on to the parish council representative, Councillor John Woodman. I probably should have declared that we sit on a committee together as the joint Swanmore and Bishop's Waltham Cemetery Committee, sir, but we have had no discussions regarding this application. So over to you, John.
Committee, thank you very much. As you know, Swanmore Parish Council objects to this development. This proposal is back garden development, which is contrary to the Swanmore Village Design Statement, paragraphs 2.3 and 5.2, which is also specifically referenced as important in the recently adopted local plan, paragraph 14.96. We would challenge the officer's assertion that any development on this site would not cause any overlooking issues, given that the site is surrounded on all sides by other properties. Given the topography of the site, no amount of landscape or design will be able to prevent this. unless the proposed property has no windows or 30-foot trees are planted as part of the development, to replace the ones shown in images that will need to be removed as part of this build. We all know this is not feasible. In the information pack provided by officers as part of this meeting, there is a really important omission on the proposed site plan, although Cameron has just mentioned it, which is the blue hatched area. It is specifically marked in the drawing as for potential future development. As a property investor myself, I can tell you that this process that they're going through, that will come through as a second application. This changes the significance of any decision made at this meeting to the extent that whilst this application is outlined, it would agree to the principle of development on the site and result in a second application with an additional property. You're not just discussing this outline, but what this opens up for the remainder of the site. Paragraph 75 of the 2024 National Policy Planning Framework states, and I quote, plans should consider the case for setting out policies to resist inappropriate development of residential gardens, for example, where development would cause harm to the local area. The proposed development would not be in keeping with the existing pattern of development in the surrounding area. There's a clear building line along New Road and no other back garden development in this part of New Road. And a previous back garden bungalow development was previously rejected by yourselves. And nothing materially has changed to mean that this development would now be acceptable. And I quote from the previous objection reasons, the development is considered to be an inappropriate development for a residential garden and would set a precedent for backland development, which may make it hard for the local planning authority to resist other similar proposals, which would cumulatively further detract from and erode the character, appearance and variety of this part of Swanmore. In summary, Swanmore Parish Council objects to this application on the grounds it is in contravention of the National Policy Framework and the recently adopted Winchester Local Plan with regard to residential garden development and the effect on the nature and character of this part of Swanmore. We would encourage you to reject it.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any questions for Swanmore Parish Council members? No, excellent. Thank you, John, if you return to your seats. And then next up, we have the Board Councillor, Councillor Malcolm Wallace. You know the drill.
Right, Chair, thank you. I'm speaking as a ward member and following on from the points already made. I don't want to repeat the detail of the objections, but I would like to focus the committee on what I see as the key planning question here. This is not just a question of design, it is fundamentally a question about whether this site is appropriate for development in the first place. Yes, the site lies within the settlement boundary and that gives a general presumption in favour of development, but that presumption is not unconditional. Development still needs to respect the character, layout and pattern of development in the area and comply with the adopted Swanmore Village Design Statement. In this part of New Road, there is a very clear and consistent pattern of development. Houses fronting the road, long rear gardens behind and a strong established building line. This proposal breaks that pattern by introducing a new dwelling into the rear garden and in doing so creates a form of backland development that is not characteristic of this part of the village. Now, it may well be the case that the plot is large enough to physically accommodate a dwelling and that access can be achieved, but that is not the key test. Planning is not simply about whether something can be made to fit, it is about whether the form of development is appropriate to its setting. In this case, those long rear gardens are not just spare land, they are a defining part of the established pattern of development along New Road. Introducing a dwelling into that space fundamentally alters that pattern. The village design statement is very clear on this point. It advises that garden plots should be protected from overdevelopment and inappropriate infilling, and that new development must respect the scale, spacing and relationship of neighbouring properties. This proposal conflicts with those principles. Members should also note that a very similar proposal near at Whitsbury was refused. In that case, the council concluded that a dwelling in a rear garden would result in a cramped and inappropriate form of development, harmful to character and residential amenity, and would set a precedent for further backland development. That reasoning is highly relevant here. Whitsbury is only 2-3 doors down. I do recognise that the plot here is larger than the one at Whitesbury, but the issue in that decision was not simply the size of the garden, it was the introduction of backland development that conflicted with the established pattern of the area and created an unwelcome precedent. If anything, the presence of a larger rear garden here is part of what defines the character of this stretch of new road. And developing it would erode that characteristic in exactly the way the village design statement seeks to avoid. The officer report places significant weight on the fact that this is an outline application and that detailed issues can be addressed later. However, the concern raised by residents and the parish council is that the harm is not simply about detailed design, it arises from the principle of placing a dwelling in this location at all. Both the village design statement and the Whitesbury decision demonstrate that this type of backland development can be harmful in principle, regardless of detailed design. Once that principle is established, it becomes much harder to address the impacts at the reserved matters stage. There is also a wider issue of precedent. The Whitesbury decision highlights the risk that allowing this type of development makes it more difficult to resist similar proposals in the future. Along a road like this, where the pattern of development is consistent, that could lead to a gradual and cumulative erosion of character. So the committee is really being asked to make a judgment. Whether this proposal is simply making efficient use of land within the settlement, or whether it represents a form of development that is out of keeping with the area, conflicts with the village design statement, and risks setting an unwelcome precedent. Given the strength of local concern, the clear policy context in the village design statement, and the importance of maintaining the character of this central part of Swanmore, I would respectfully ask the committee to give very careful weight to those issues in reaching its decision. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any questions for the ward member? No, excellent. Thank you very much. We do not have a supporter down to speak, so we go back now to Cameron. Any update following public participation?
I've got nothing further to add, thank you, Chair.
Excellent. We'll move on to questions in that case then. Councillor Small.
Thank you. As we've just heard about the previous application for a house a few doors down, I'm just looking at the decision now. I just wanted if you could clarify how this differs from that application. Obviously, it was some time ago. It was 2012. Is that correct? Has policy changed? Could you just talk us through how that might be different? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the question because I've also got the application up on my screen. Yeah, you've rightly identified that it was determined in 2012, so subject to different local plan policies two plans ago, really. So in terms of how things have moved on, we do know that there is a housing crisis across the country, and we are doing all we can to increase the numbers of houses. And ultimately, at its foundation, and I'm sure you've heard this a number of times, we judge each site on its merits. So we wouldn't be able to directly refer to another site and come to the same conclusions. We need to establish whether there is harm associated with the proposals before you today. So I think the planning policy context has changed quite considerably, and we are looking at a different site. Who knows what would come up if the Whitesbury site came before you today? We would have to reassess that on those grounds. But what you've seen from your case officer's report is that we have been unable to identify any harm with a new dwelling here. And if we can't identify harm, the government is telling us to be proactive in bringing new housing forward.
Chair, if I may, there's also some crucial legislation in the interim, which is obviously very different to the context in 2012 as well. So we have the South Building Custom House Building Act of 2015. So obviously postdates that particular decision, and it's quite a crucial piece of legislation in that it places a duty upon the local planning authority to look at demand and needs in relation to self-building custom housing. In particular, it refers at 2A, the duty to grant planning permission. You heard the ward councillor mention about presumptions here. There is a second presumption which is engaged, and that's a matter of law, which is before you. And it says in the South Building Custom Housing Act of 2015, An authority to which this section applies must give. Now, must in law means it's mandatory. You have no discretion. So it's not a discretionary power, it's a mandatory task. So an authority to which this section applies must give development permission for the carrying out of South Build and Custom House building on enough service plots of land to meet the demand for South Build and Custom House building in the authority's area. So in conclusion, the legal framework has changed as well, and that we have this duty in which we must give permission to meet demands and needs for South Build and Custom Housing.
Councillor White?
So the ward councillor mentioned about the spacing of the properties around, and although it is a large plot, it's been subdivided, isn't it? So that some of the gardens being retained by the existing building. And you acknowledge in the report that the building on the northeast side adjoining that bit of garden is very close to the boundary, and also the garage that kind of butts onto the back of West Winds is also very close to the boundary. I'm just wondering if those distances are, well, what those distances are. It's hard to tell from the indicative drawings how far away they are from the boundary and whether that is sufficient space really between the properties.
Yeah, so I'll just sort of highlight and say this is indicative at this stage, and say that the layout itself will be confirmed at reserve matters if the application is approved. The distance, the footprint of the dwelling itself here, the nearest point is approximately there, which comes out to about approximately 6 meters. And then just towards this sort of the eastern point of the site, it's around 6.9. And also to highlight, so the nearest point of the dwelling to number 16 Myers Close was 14.5 meters. And then to number 18 Myers Close, which this is the side elevation, is 22.5. Regarding the distance from the garage to the boundary, I don't have that number, unfortunately, but I say it is basically adjoining the boundary itself. However, the distance from the garage to West Winds is approximately 26. It's approximately 27 to Parkview and approximately 25 itself to Dean Cottage.
Okay, well, what I mean is that it's a very narrow strip of land between the boundaries of the other properties, and I know we don't know the impact on the neighbouring amenity at the moment until the reserve matters, but to me, just looking at the drawing, it could possibly look out of kilter with the rest of the pattern of the buildings, just because it is so close to the boundary and there's just not much space. I don't know if you could comment on the sort of character and spacing.
So when sort of doing the assessment, I sort of looked at sort of the overall size of the curtilages of surrounding dwellings, as well as the footprint of the dwellings itself, and it was considered when I was taking a look through that, it was felt the overall size of the site itself was sort of in keeping to the size of the curtilages as well as the size of the dwelling itself, with that within the surrounding area.
That's a pet.
Two quick questions, if I may. First one is, what date is the Swanmore Village Design Statement, and how much weight should that therefore be given? And the second one, I take on board everything you said, Mr. Lucas. Thank you for that clarification. Do we have an idea of the demand for self-build in the district, or is it the case that because we have an application in front of us that is deemed to demonstrate demand?
So we record base periods, is what the law says. The section I referred you to gives the period of time when you start calculating the base periods, and we were anticipating the question. I think Deborah was you have a particular document in relation to our plots of land and individuals on the register. So we have to complete, as a matter of law, a South Build and Custom House building register, where individuals who are interested in being on that register, and when plots come forwards, can be married up, if you like. And during those particular periods of time, we then accordingly will grant permissions, much like what we have before you today. So then we can see how the demand and need is being measured in accordance with that particular duty in law. It's more planning policy rather than law. My job is just to outline the law to you. I don't know the details and the figures because obviously it's a matter for planning, but I believe Deborah's got the figures.
Thank you. Yes, currently we have a deficit of 147 on self-build. So that is a material consideration.
So that will go in the balance. So if you're minded to refuse, the applicant here will refer to that duty I pointed out to you, and that will weigh in the balance. As we know, this is ordinarily in relation to housing, 5-year housing land supply, and if we're behind on 5-year housing land supply, there is a tilted balance. The tilted balance may also apply here for the south building issue.
Just wanted to give almost a roundup on that, because I can see members are concerned about the indicative drawing, because it does show a large block of a house there and close to the boundaries. In some ways, an indicative drawing like that isn't helpful, because it does give the impression that they're looking for a very large house. But as all matters are reserved, we would pay very much attention to layout, form, scale of that building. So at the moment, we don't know what it looks like. And we would certainly be very mindful of neighbour amenity issues and any harm. And I think whilst, yes, of course, the deficit in self-build is a material consideration, that does not suggest that you must approve this self-build house if we identify harm. But as you can see from the officer's report and what I've just said about all matters being reserved, we don't think there would be any harm resulting from this, because we would ultimately be able to negotiate on the overall form of the development under the reserved matters application.
I personally don't unfortunately have the date of the VDS. I can't confirm that for you. I'm sorry.
It's not very recent.
Councillor Small.
Yes, you just answered some of it. Thank you. I was going to just ask that it was clarified that when it does come forward with the actual plans, because it came up when the objectors were speaking, they were concerned about overlooking living areas and bedrooms, and obviously we judge those two things differently. The living area has got more value as we see it. I just wondered if you could clarify that, and if we would then use any kind of obscured glazing in any areas upstairs that may overlook gardens and stuff. Thank you.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Neighbour amenity is a significant issue when you are in a built-up area, and that drops down from national planning policy into our local plans. So we are very mindful of any effect, and that could be how the dwelling is positioned within the plot, how it's orientated, where the main windows are, could even relate to a single level house if we thought overlooking was going to be significant at 2-storey. So we really do get to look at everything under the reserved matters application. So yeah, if we felt it appropriate, we could remove PD rights for new openings. We could insist on obscure glazing, work with the internal layout of the dwelling also to make sure that there was no significant overlooking from principal rooms into neighbouring properties. So all of those matters would be considered under the reserved matters application.
Any other questions, members? No? So we'll move on to debate in that case. Anybody for debate? Councillor White.
So yeah, I appreciate the deficit of self-build properties, and I'm trying to weigh up what the harm is of allowing this, and it's difficult on an outline application because it's hard to judge what the amenity impact would be. I mean, obviously it's a large plot, it's set back from the road. I know the road quite well, but I do, yeah, looking at the plans, I do feel it's possibly out of kilter with the actual pattern and spacing of some of those other properties, but I'll listen to others in the debate.
Any others for debate?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the fact is that Swanmore, and Swanmore is not alone in this respect, there is a presumption of permission for development within the settlement boundary, and this is, on the face of it, a pretty large plot, even in comparison with those around it. And given the obligation that Mr. Lucas informed us of in terms of the Self-Build Act and so on, and the pressure on us to deliver more homes. I think it's inevitable that plots like this are going to come up, and it will be hard to resist granting this outline permission. I think, for what it's worth, we've seen this so many times in the district. I'm right, Chilbolton Avenue from 20 years ago always comes into my head for this, and it's true to say the character of that road has changed over time. Characters of roads do change over time, I'm afraid, and that's just something we have to accept. So I think on balance, I'm at the moment minded to permit.
Any further members of it? Councillor Langford-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I do understand the residents' presentations and also the councillors' presentations. We've had something very similar to this in Denmead. Very similar, a house with one in the back garden, and it then went 6 all the way down because all the houses then put their gardens forward as well. We don't have a crystal ball, we have to go on what is in front of us. And with Mr. Lucas's comments about the fact that it's not discretionary, it's a must give, it's mandatory because of the self-build register, I'm minded to permit.
Excellent. I'll chip in at this point if that's okay. I think sadly I would like to sort of say I would like to take the weight of the Swanmore Village design statement into account, but the self-build requirement is pushing back on that, unfortunately. I do think that even if we do permit this for outline application, I think the reserve matters are going to have to be scrutinised incredibly hard, and I would almost expect it to come back to committee at that stage, because then the issues of overlooking and being overbearing certainly is something that I think needs further sort of debate at that stage. But for the outline application as it is, I think we have to permit. Any other members for debate? Oh, Councillor Gordon-Smith, sorry.
Yes, I mean, I have to say I rather agree that as Councillor Pett said, the character of places does change over time. And where I live in Alresford, it's changed very considerably. And there's been quite a lot of backland development, and people adjust to it. And it does make for quite an efficient town in which you can walk to places rather than driving. So I think I'm minded to support this, and I know it's fairly clear that there's going to be another one coming up next door, but we're not allowed to make a judgment about that. It's only what's on the page in front of us, and as legal advisor said, there is a presumption to allow it, and hopefully we can spend a lot of effort on the detailed design to overcome any shortcomings. So yes, I'm prepared to support it.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reassure you that I think it's appropriate that the application is reported to committee when we receive the reserve matters. So we'll make sure that happens.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Lamings.
Yeah, I think that's quite a sensible solution. So on that basis, I'm quite happy to support it.
Any further for debate? No. So we come to the decision then. The recommendation for this outline application is to permit. Can I see all those in favour of permitting this outline application? All members. Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we'll take a short 7-minute break and come back at 25 past. Welcome back, everybody. Good to go. Wonderful. So we will move on to our next planning application, which is agenda item 10, which is Colebrook Street in Winchester, at number 15A Colebrook Street. And our presenting officer is not got a name tag. Rob. Callum. Okay, over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Robert Callow. I don't appear to have a name badge, so just thought I'll put that out there. So this is a house application for Colebrook Cottage, 15A Colebrook Street, for a single-storey rear extension. So here's the location plan. So it is defined by the red rectangle. So it's about a 5-minute walk from where we're at the moment. It's in Colebrook Street, so very close to where we are. To the west of 15A, we've got 16 Colebrook Street, which is a listed building, and the still that's working. Yeah, can't seem to get it to. There we go. There we go. So 16 Colebrook Street is a listed building, and then the kind of garden wall here is also a separate listing. 13 to 15 Colebrook Street is also listed. There's one listing. These 3 terrace houses here. So here is an aerial photograph of Colebrook Cottage. So it's this area here. Southwest of this zoning house here is 16.5 Colebrook Street, and then the house along here make up Colebrook Place. So as stated, this is an application for a single-storey rear extension. So the grey square / rectangle here is the proposed rear extension. The lighter grey area here is proposed to be the patio, and the white rectangle here is the proposed skylight as part of the single-storey rear extension. So here are some other houses along the area. So Colebrook Street is predominantly made of red brick. There is a variety of different colours along the area as well. So these are all within 10 to 12 doors of Colebrook Cottage. So here's the existing and proposed ground floor plans. There was actually some old plans that got amended. Probably should include it in here. But so here's the rear wall of the current ground floor plan. So it's got a staggered rear wall. And then to the right of here, we've got the proposed ground floor. So it's supposed to be from here to here is about 5.1 meters. And then so it's going to extend beyond the rearmost wall of 5.1 meters. And it's going to extend beyond the, I guess, less rear parts by 6 meters. So as it's a single-storey rear extension, there is no proposed front elevation change. However, this is just a photograph of the front elevation. So we've got red brick on the ground floor. We've got render on the first floor. There is one detail which is quite important for later on in the presentation. So there is like a corbellum brick pattern along the so I'll move this closer. So there's so on the single story, on the ground floor, is made of predominantly red brick, and then on the first floor is made of render. There is a corbellum brick feature along the top of the ground floor, so where the red brick ends. So here's the existing proposed east elevation. So at the top is the current elevation. The old plan at the bottom was proposed to have a roof light. It was proposed to have a fascia lining around the top of the ground floor. The amended plans over here, they've been amended. So the corbellum brick feature, which is on the existing elevation, is proposed to be replicated along the proposed ground floor. The fascia lining has also gone, and the proposed roof lantern has been replaced for a roof light. And here are some pictures along Colebrook Place. So this picture here on the right hand side, that's as Colebrook Street becomes goes on to Colebrook Place. So you get a view of the houses along Colebrook Place on the left of this picture here. And here are some pictures just along Colebrook Place as with a view onto Colebrook Cottage. So here is the existing proposed west elevation, so pretty much the same as the east elevation. Again, the roof lanterns no longer going to be present. The corbellum brick feature is on the top of the ground floor on the proposed rear extension. So here's the existing and proposed roof plan. So this is currently the existing roof plan. This is the old roof plan, and this is the amended plan that's good. So I think the main change we can see from here is that the roof lantern is going to be replaced for a roof light, and the roof extension is going to be slightly narrower, so it's not going to be the entire width of the existing dwelling house to maintain subservience. So pictures 1 and 2 are from Colbrook Place. We've got some pictures on the right hand side. These are from within the garden of Colbrook Cottage with a view of the west garden wall separating 16.5 Colbrook Street and Colbrook Cottage. And here are some more pictures from the garden of Colbrook Cottage. So number 1 kind of looks across from the rear garden. Number 2 is Colbrook Cottage, the rear garden of Colbrook Cottage with a view into Colbrook Place. And numbers 3 and 4 just give another view of the rear garden, the side wall garden separating 16.5 Colbrook Street and Colbrook Cottage. Thank you for my presentation, and this is the recommended verdict is to permit.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. So we now move to public speaking. So I have 2 objectors down. I have Robert Little and Patrick Daniel. You have 3 minutes between you. Have you organised who's speaking? Or excellent. Excellent. If you come on forward then to the chairs in front of the microphone. So if you make yourself comfortable and get familiar. So as soon as you're ready, if you press the button at the base of the microphone to turn it on, and then as soon as you start speaking, that's as soon as the timer will start.
Good morning. I am the owner of number 2 Colbrook Place, and Robert Little beside me owns number 6. We speak on behalf of the 8 owners of Colbrook Place who have objected. There are other objections from 2 neighbours and also from the City of Winchester Trust. We present 3 material considerations to this planning application. Firstly, the effect on Colbrook Place due to overdevelopment, scale and massing. Colbrook Place is a unique Georgian street of historic value in Winchester's conservation area. It is an intact and rare example of the city's Georgian townscape. The effect of the proposed 3.6 metre high wall on Colbrook Place's western side would be contrary to the character and distinctiveness of the street scene. The planning application thus conflicts with paragraph 187 of National Planning Policy Framework Section 15, which seeks to conserve and enhance the local environment. Secondly, the effect on numbers 1 and 2 Colbrook Place due to overshadowing and loss of light. The western wall of the proposed extension is 90% of the height of the facade of the cottages it will overshadow, and the wall extends to the width of cottage number 1. This wall, due to its proximity, would take light from the windows of cottages number 1 and 2, and will create an oppressive, sort of hemmed-in feeling. The 2 letters of objection from Mr. Brasher, who is the owner of number 1, illustrate this adverse impact. Also, the roof light of the extension will cause light pollution for neighbouring properties and the surrounding area. The application thus conflicts with Winchester District Local Plan Policy CP20, which requires development to avoid adverse impacts on neighbouring properties. And the matter is also mentioned on page 13 in the Hampshire Guide to Planning Regulations. And finally, the City Planning Department have rejected similar applications in the immediate area. Applications for similar but smaller extensions in our area have in the past been refused on the grounds that they, in the words of the City Planning Department itself, and I quote, would result in an excessive building bulk adjacent to an existing residential property and be detrimental to the visual outlook and amenities of the occupier of such property. And that's application 02-00501 FUL. and also would result in overshadowing and loss of light and outlook. And that's application 03-00892 FUL. Thank you for listening to these considerations.
Excellent, fantastic timing there. Members, do we have any questions for the objectors? No, excellent. You've put forward your case very well. If you could turn off the microphone by pressing the button and return to your seats at the back. And I think as we go back to Rob, any updates following public participation?
No updates from me, no.
So we come to questions on the report, and I think if we could all speak clearly into the microphone just so that the objectors can hear us properly. Any questions on the report? Councillor Pett.
Yeah, just looking at the list of objecting representations, there's no reference there to any objection from Winchester Trust or anything like that. Could you just tell me if there were any objections from conservation organisations or the like?
The City Winchester Trust did make an objection, and that was included in the figure within the report.
Can we have some detail of that objection?
On top of my head, I believe that was to do with the character of the area and how the amended plans were designed to be more satisfactory considering the character of Culver Street.
May I push that a little bit further? The only amendment in the plan is, or the main purpose of the amendment was to take out the sort of roof light, wasn't it? Whereas the objectors that we heard were more concerned with the wall that's going up on the west side of Colebrook Place. So could you give me a bit more on what the professional planner's view is on that wall in the context of this conservation area, please?
So the wall's going to be 3.6 metres tall. So I'm of the view that it's sufficiently set back from Colebrook Place to avoid doubts regarding overbearing development and overshadowing. Regarding the character of the area, the wall's going to be white painted brick, which is not inconsistent with materials that are already used throughout the area. So I don't believe that warrants a refusal.
Councillor Langford-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the 3.6 metre high wall. Normal ceiling heights are 2.4 metres. So even if you went to 3 metres to include your insulation, 3.6 seems to be rather high to me. And I know that the neighbours are concerned about loss of light. Could the officer explain the need for 3.6 metres?
So 3.6 metres, I believe, is of a height that will avoid overbearing development overshadowing into all houses along Colebrook Place. It's supposed to be a 6 metre distance between Colebrook Place to Colebrook Cottage and one Colebrook Place. One Colebrook Place being the closest house to Colebrook Cottage. And there is also there is a quite tall wall separating Colebrook Place and the east elevation, the east wall. Sorry, I'll say that again. There's already quite a tall wall separating Colebrook Place and the rear garden of Colebrook Cottage. I think that results in sufficient screening to prevent a substantial loss of light.
Any further questions from members? Councillor Langford-Smith.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the existing and proposed ground floor plans, and the plan says that it's changing the dining room into a sitting room, but that sitting room appears to have an ensuite shower to it, which potentially means that it is actually a bedroom which would mean an intensification of use of the actual building if it is an additional bedroom. Is that a material planning consideration?
Essentially, are we in a water sensitive area in Winchester?
We're not a flood risk zone, no.
Water use though?
I'm not aware of that question, I'm afraid, sorry.
I think because it's only one additional bedroom and it's not an annex or additional dwelling, then it's not material that they've indicated a shower room in that space.
Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm going to go back to this wall again. Looking at the photographs you gave us from looking from Colebrook Place, the current wall there, difficult as it is to make an estimate from a photograph here, but it looks as if it's probably less than 2 meters to be replaced by 3.6, did we say? That's one heck of a difference in the streetscape of that part of the conservation area. I'm afraid, given the lack of detail of the objection from the City of Winchester Trust, I am really nervous of taking a positive view on that. I wonder if anybody can help me with that.
Thank you, Chair. I have the objection from the City of Winchester Trust up. It's quite brief. The Trust objects to this application because the proposed development is out of keeping with the character of Colebrook Place, where its effect will be most keenly felt. The proposed height of the extension is excessive. The appearance of the extension could be improved by lowering the height of the eaves level and by the use of a pitched roof, which would be more in keeping with the character of the street. You've heard from your officers that an assessment has been made upon the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, and it's clearly the officers' view that the impact would be neutral. But if members were minded to take an alternative view, I assume it's a site that members are familiar with. A site visit wouldn't benefit you because you're aware of the site. So it would really come down to whether whether members took an alternative view to officers and considered it to be harmful in the character, in the context of the character of the street.
Any further questions? No, we will move to debate in that case. Anybody for debate? Councillor Laming.
I'm very concerned with this.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Laming, if you could, just for the benefit of the objectors, really put that microphone next to your lips.
I am concerned about this. I think it's changing the character of the area by having such a high wall and such a long extension. I'm not minded to listen to other people, but I really think that this needs to be looked at quite hard. And I'm of the opinion that this does materially affect the nature of the conservation area.
Any others for debate? Councillor Pett.
Okay, I agree, I'm afraid. The height of I can understand exactly why the applicant wants to put a high wall there, because that will make the plot symmetrical, as it were, given that there's a high wall the other side. But I do take on board everything the objectors said, and indeed the City of Winchester Trust, that such a high wall in that location would be to the detriment of the character of that part of Winchester. Now, given that Colebrook Place, the property itself is clearly more recent, I think, than the cottages on the other side of the road, the extension of itself, I don't think would cause considerable harm at all. It's that wall that I really have difficulty with. That would, you know, in effect be putting a real barrier along one side of an historic street.
Thank you, Chair. I do understand members' concerns about the height of that wall. Is there a suggestion from this committee that a reduced height would be acceptable in that location? Because if that's the case, we could potentially defer the application for further negotiation.
What are members' thoughts? Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yeah, I'm. You can see the height of the wall. It's going to be level with the existing brickwork on the existing building, and it's a pretty big blank wall there. And I think there are probably design methods of reducing that impact and not have such a drastic effect on rather a narrow and attractive street.
I think you look at the overall mass of the extension proposed. Realistically, I can't imagine we'll be able to reduce it by any more than about 400 to 500 mil. And you potentially could reduce the depth of the extension so you haven't got such a significant mass in the street. I don't know whether the applicant is going to be amenable to any of these changes. It just occurs to me that rather than refuse the application on impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, it might be reasonable to go back to the applicant and put that to them if members were minded to refuse. But I would ultimately come back to your officer's report where these matters have been considered, and in our professional view, we don't think it's harmful.
Any others for debate?
I think that's quite a sensible solution, to defer it and see what the applicant's prepared to do.
I am slightly worried. Would we be in the territory of potentially going to appeal for non-determination, or?
Potentially, but I don't think that would harm our case.
I think if there are any other contributions or any other thoughts at this time, I think, Councillor White.
Yeah, I was kind of erring towards it being acceptable just because in the report it mentions about how you've made changes to the materials to try and fit in with what's already there, but it hadn't really occurred to me about now people have said big blank wall on a conservation street. I'm now like in two minds. So deferring it if possible, if that is an option, but in my mind it's about the materials more than the height.
Yes, I don't think there's going to be any sort of neighbouring amenity impact in regards to the wall being a street, but it is the conservation aspect. Councillor Langford-Smith, you had your hand up, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. If we are at risk of non-determination and that causing cost to council, then I would rather vote to refuse, and then it can be renegotiated.
I think either way, if we go to appeal, it's at a cost to the council, so I think that's fairly neutral, but entirely up to members today if they consider there is sufficient harm to warrant a refusal. But members would need to be clear about the aspects of the development that make it harmful, so we would have a defensible refusal reason.
Councillor Pett.
Sorry, we seem to have jumped to refusal. I thought we were looking at deferring for a short time to negotiate with the applicant to see whether there was any scope for reducing the size of the wall, because I don't think anybody's objecting to the extension per se. It's just that one factor.
I think if that's your proposal, Councillor Pett, to defer it in order to negotiate, I think that the bulk of the extension itself, I think, is acceptable. I think it's just this wall issue in regards to the character of the area. So I think if that's your proposal and you have a seconder, Councillor Laming.
I'm very happy to propose.
Yeah, so we're now voting to defer this application so that there can be a negotiation in regards to the applicant regarding the wall. Can I see all those in favour of deferring this application? So that application is not determined at this committee. It has been deferred. Right, so we move on to our final item on the agenda, which is item 11, Highland Lanham Lane. I think it's worth, well, I'll go straight over to Cameron to introduce this, but I think just understanding why this has come back is going to be quite important. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, just trying to change over the slide. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is 25012887 FUL. So you had this application in front of you, the committee meeting on the 20th of January 2026. So a proposal for the construction of a new 2-storey detached dwelling at Highland Lanham Lane. So we have, I'll just put the proposed site plan up there just to remind you. So basically at that time that was approved subject to the completion of a legal agreement. The legal agreement was needed to secure details of the proposed package treatment plant, the maintenance and monitoring of that, and then there was a matter regarding a window on a neighbouring property or the existing dwelling as well. So that was signed on the 1st of May. But in the intervening period, we have adopted the new local plan in March 2026, and there were policies on the condition list. So we have presented this as an addendum today because as a result of that, the policies listed on those conditions no longer apply. They've been superseded by the newly adopted local plan. So that specifically, conditions 14 and condition 15 are amended. So those were the conditions to secure archaeological mitigation. And then in addition to that, condition 7 has been deleted for the reasons that are set out on page 136 in the 3rd paragraph. Just to update members as well, the report does list policy CP13 from the original local plan part 2. That should read policy CP11 throughout that paragraph. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. We don't have any public speakers, so questions on the report. Councillor Lehman.
Yeah, okay. Condition 7, why has that been removed?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So
CP11 secured the code for sustainable standards in line with the code for sustainable homes. That is no longer enforced, and the only reason we were requiring that was it was required to meet that policy CP11. That policy has now been superseded. So as this development was brought forward prior and was designed prior to new policy, local plan policy CN1 and CN8 being adopted, we've accepted it's not reasonable to apply the carbon neutrality policies to this application when CP11 was in place when it was being designed and considered. However, we can reassure that building regulations now exceed the provisions of the codes for sustainable homes. So even without this condition, actually, should the building be built in line with building regulations, the energy efficiency standards should be greater than what was required through this policy. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions on the report? Move to debate. Any debate? No, we'll move to the decision in that case. So this application is recommended to permit with the change of conditions. Can I see all those in favour of permitting? Excellent, and that's the final item. So that's the conclusion of our planning committee today.